Welcome back to Nonfiction for Life. I'm your host, Janet Perry, and this is the podcast where we talk to authors who've written compelling, true stories and great ideas for living well. Today we'll be talking to Dr. Fred E. Woods, author of Reflections of Kalaupapa, a book about the leper colony in Hawaii. But before we get into the book, first we want to thank you for participating in our Book Fairies event. We've been hiding books all over and you've been finding them. Thank you for posting your pictures and for having fun with us. We also found a great response to our new category, Children's Nonfiction. If you have other ideas for great books that you want us to talk about, please send an email to feedback@nonfictionforlife.com or just post it on our Facebook page or other social media channels. And now I'm pleased to introduce our author today, Dr. Fred E. Woods. He completed a PhD in Middle East Studies with an emphasis in Hebrew Bible at the University of Utah. He's currently a professor at Brigham Young University, where he serves in the College of Religious Education. He's been a visiting professor at several universities, most recently at the Harris Manchester College in Oxford. Dr. Woods has lectured extensively in the United States and internationally, and has been involved with interfaith work for many years. He's authored or co-authored 15 books and about 100 academic articles. He's also produced several documentaries, including the film The Soul of Kalaupapa, Voices of Exile. The book we'll be talking about today is called Reflections of Kalaupapa, and it comes after his decade-long study of a group of people with leprosy who were separated and exiled to a small part of the island of Molokai in Hawaii, and the community was named Kalaupapa. So today we'll be talking to him about community building principles he learned. The book contains 58 first-person accounts from people of different cultures and faiths who've been touched by their experience there. And now we welcome Dr. Woods. Welcome to Nonfiction for Life, Dr. Woods. Thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be with you, Janet.
So let's give our listeners a little more background on Kalaupapa. Can you briefly explain the history behind how this community came to be?
Kalaupapa is an unforgettable experience. It is not only a place where one gathers a lot of interesting information on Hawaii, but it's a transformative experience. And it's in the Hawaiian Islands on the island of Molokai. And Kalaupapa was turned into a leprosy settlement commencing in 1866. By that time, King Kamehameha V had decided that the disease was taking too many of the Hawaiian natives, and he wanted to put a stop to it. And so after counseling with his privy council, they decided that they would send people that were stricken with this disease, now known as Hansen's disease, to this place on the north shore of Molokai, which incidentally means flat land.
Can you give us some sense of the numbers? How many people are we talking about? How many had the disease?
Well, during the time period of between the time the settlement opened and closed, so a 103-year period between 1866 and 1969, there are over 8,000 patients that are sent to Kalaupapa. And so we never have more than about 1,000 at a time, but we have this unique region that is, if you can just picture the ocean, three sides of Kalaupapa is covered with water, and then you have the steepest cliffs in the Pacific that are on the back side of it so that the patients couldn't escape. So it was definitely selected for a reason to keep those that were sent there from ever leaving.
No wonder Robert Louis Stevenson described it as a prison fortified by nature.
Exactly.
It's well said. Let's explode some of the myths around leprosy. There was a high mortality rate of the people in Kalaupapa, and yet we know a lot more about leprosy. We know that it had that biblical stigma of being unclean, but we know it's neither fatal nor highly infectious. So contrary to popular belief, limbs don't fall off necessarily. And someone came along and discovered there was a cure. Can you tell us about him and how that happened?
So back in 1873, Dr. Gerhard Hansen was the first to discover this bacteria that affects the skin and the nerves. And so that's why leprosy is now known as Hansen's disease, because of his discovery.
So they had there was this fear that persisted though around it, and they were separated. Even though it wasn't really contagious, it ripped apart families, and sometimes those families were separated indefinitely. And that was the common thread among these people in the community. And they came from evidently many different backgrounds, many different religions and ethnicities. Can you describe somehow the magnitude of those separations? Who was touched by this?
Well, they call it the separating sickness, and most of the patients that are sent to Kalaupapa were Hawaiians, because we're in that vicinity of the Hawaiian Islands. But this was very difficult. I've been conducting interviews there for the last dozen years, and I can remember particularly one woman describing what it was like when her little boy would come to visit her, and he would ask, "Mommy, why do you have to be in that cage?" And so when a woman gave birth to a child at Kalaupapa, very quickly the Board of Health would take the child away. And these were really difficult times, and as you mentioned, had a tendency to fracture families. So even though there were times that it was highly contagious, depending on whether the leprosy would flare up, most of the time they were able to keep it under control after cell phone drugs were used commencing in the 1940s. And so after that time, they're able to arrest the disease, get things under control, and by 1969, they're able to allow the patients to leave, and they shut down the settlement. And now today, there's only about 10 patients that are living there, and it's being they're working towards opening up as a national park after the last patient has passed away.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things, that women had children there. Life kind of went on. People married, and they lived as a community would live, but they needed help. They needed help.
Right.
And so there's something known as kokua, or otherwise translated as help, and they needed to come in and provide medical help and so forth. And how, on the records, how many kokua do we have showing?
Well, we have about 200 on the records, but there's probably double that. And so some people came as helpers to assist their loved ones, friends and family, when people were so sick they couldn't take care of themselves. So this is a wonderful thing. It's indicative of the Hawaiian culture of taking care of what we would refer to as the ohana, the family, which is not just the immediate family, but the larger family of cousins and aunties and uncles and things. And so, yeah, this is a wonderful lesson in truly taking care of others in need.
Were these kokua, all volunteers like that, relatives and friends and people who cared, and self-assigned, or were some of them assigned to go to Kalaupapa?
This is voluntary. A kokua is a helper, but think of it in the sense of someone that is volunteering to do something. And to me, it's very powerful because it reminds me of the biblical passage in the first epistle of John that states that perfect love casts out all fear.
That's a beautiful connection, especially since there was a lot of fear surrounding that community. Well, two of these kokua are very well known now. they're Jonathan Hawaii Napella and Father Damien, both known for being tremendous helpers in the community, but very different in background. However, what the records show is that they were the best of friends. So first of all, what did they have in... First of all, tell us about each one, and then tell us what they had in common.
Well, Jonathan Hawaii Napella is probably the most catalytic convert to Mormonism, in the sense that when the Mormon missionaries first came to Hawaii in the 1850s, this was a man that at first was very skeptical as a Hawaiian judge on the island of Maui, but he did a little investigating and became converted, and then he told the missionaries that the key to being effective was learning the native language. So he invited them into his home, and for about 2 months at a time, he would teach the missionaries. And so he really set things in motion as far as making a connection between the native Hawaiians and the Howleys coming from the Utah area for the most part. But he, interestingly enough, his wife contracted the disease and was sent to Kalaupapa in 1873. And rather than abandoning her, he requested that he could go as a kokua and to take care of his wife. And the end of the story is he gets there in 1873 and dies just 6 years later from the effects of the disease. 2 weeks before his wife did.
They both contracted it. Interesting. Yeah. Father Damien was a Catholic priest, as I understand. Tell us about him.
Yes, Father Damien is one of my heroes. Even though I teach at Brigham Young University, which is a predominantly school for Latter-day Saints or Mormons, I often tell my students that they need to know more about Father Damien. Here is a Belgian priest, 5'9", sturdy 200 pounds, who's, I think of wonderful lines that he said. One of my favorites is, suppose the disease does destroy my body, God will give me a new one on Resurrection Day. So this is a person who begs his bishop, his ecclesiastical leader, to let him go to Kalaupapa, and he doesn't want to do any rotation with other priests. He wants to stay there and give his life there, which he eventually does. He comes in the same year that the Hansen's disease is discovered, the same year that Napella's come. So in 1873, Father Damien came to Kalaupapa, and 16 years later, in 1889, he also died from the effects of the disease.
So they did have that in common, sadly. How do their stories differ? It doesn't. They both came religious men, but they died believing in their own religion, which I think is really beautiful, that they allowed each other to worship and live their religions separately, yet they had this tender connection.
Yeah, I think that one thing they had in common is that they both understood this powerful principle that's universal, timeless, and self-evident, that perfect love casts out all fear. And they went knowing when they went to Kalaupapa, they were taking a risk, but their faith was greater than their fears. And I think they also, even though they were true to their own faith tradition, they had a very strong commitment to assist the community. What I love about this is we have this interaction between different faiths. And keep in mind, this is nearly a century before Vatican II, in which we see the Roman Catholic tradition that is starting to reach out more and build, bridges with different Christians. And I see the same thing with my own faith tradition, being a Latter-day Saint, that we see more and more as time goes on. We see a need that we really need to connect as a community and look for the common ground and look for ways that we can be a part of the community, be inclusive, and try to really make a difference regardless of ethnicity or religiosity.
I feel like you described in the introduction of your book really well what you learned from writing this book about a community and this bringing together of different faiths. And I wonder if you could read that to us.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the idea that I was trying to find the secret to the settlement, and the bottom line for me, the Leitwörter, the thematic word would be community. So, and I would say a model like none other in the world, not a space that is separated by borders or barriers or fences and enclosures, but a place which beckons every race and religion, every color and creed to come together and to assist one another.
That's really beautiful. You did interviews to do your research, one-on-one interviews, and there really were relatively few patients left, or people left, not just patients, but people who were touched by Kalaupapa. What was it that drove you particularly to capture those stories?
Well, going back now to December of 2003, I was going over to the island of Oahu to do some research, and it was right when I would finish would be the time of my anniversary, and so I invited my wife to go with me. And when we made our plan as far as vacation, I said, "Where do you want to go?" And we'd been studying about the different islands, and she said, "Well, you know where I'd really like to go is Kalaupapa," because she was so touched reading about Father Damien and his experience there. And so that's what we did. The first time we went down on mules on a 2,000-foot cliff, and which took a little bit of faith to get on a jackass and trust that you're going to get to the bottom safely when it was such a steep terrain. And then after going there, when I first went, I thought, boy, this would be great to write about the history of the Mormons. But I realized it was far more than any one faith tradition, that it was a story for everyone. And at the time that I went, there were 30 patients that were still there. And a number of them told me as soon as I met them, whether it was on the flight over or walking in the community, they just said, you're never going to interview me, so don't even try. And yet several summers later, after developing relationships of trust, they finally said, "You know what, Fred, bring your film crew in and we'll tell our story." And so the most beautiful part for me has been developing those friendships. And even though a third of those folks are gone or others have moved away, that was really a special transformation in my life, just working with these good people and also interviewing people that had been touched by the experience of going there. People that volunteered to fix automobiles, nurses, doctors, ecclesiastical people from different faiths. There was just a variety. A woman that would go down and cut hair. So I tried to get male and female, blue collar, white collar, just every type of person I could think of to share their experience. And the one thing I found in common is that when you go to Kalaupapa, you do not forget it. It's a memorable experience.
Well, let's talk about some of these people specifically who contributed to building this strong community. Let's start with Elizabeth Ku'ule Bell. You're going to have to help me with the Hawaiian.
Ku'ule. She goes. Yeah, she was. She's the first patient I ever met when I went to Kalaupapa. She was the postmistress there, and she knew everybody's business. And she really opened the door for me in the community. She ended up being the president of their Ohana board, but she contracted leprosy like her father did when she was only 6 years old. And the way that she discovered she had the disease is she stepped on some glass and cut her foot. And anyway, told her family and ended up being diagnosed and eventually sent over to Kalaupapa when they realized she didn't have any feeling and in certain parts of her body. So that ended up being a wonderful friendship, and I visited her burial place many times. You may also be interested in knowing that when you go to the Kalaupapa cemetery, you're not going to find little children buried, but rather you're going to find many animals. So because they would, like Kule was the one that I told you, her little boy said, "Mommy, why do you have to be in this cage?" Because there was a wire fence that separated her from her little boy at one time in the early period. And but they have their, like, I'm thinking of one of my friends named Polly, who has 4 different dogs buried beside his wife's. And so the pets actually became part of the family. And so these folks were really attached to their animals, which reminds me of Auntie Gertrude, who we called the cat woman. And she had a very cruel stepmother. Very interesting story. She had a very cruel stepmother, and so she actually prayed that she would get Hansen's disease, or as we commonly call it, commonly known as leprosy, so she wouldn't have to be with this mean stepmother. And anyway, it was very painful in her interview that to hear how she was treated, and ended up literally having to eat with pigs and things. But she developed this compassion for hungry animals, and so you'd see scores of cats at her house on any given day. But she was quite a lady, and was really good with cribbage. We'd play in the evenings cribbage to try to bond with the patients, and she loved to go to Las Vegas. A number of the patients like to go to Las Vegas as a little bit of a break, not only to do a little bit of gambling, but also the bright lights. Some of them had been, partially blinded by the disease, but they could sense those bright lights, and they just loved to come.
Well, that brings us to Makia Malo. Malo, he was
Yes.
the blind singer and storyteller who went to Las Vegas, and he acted as an advocate against the stigma of leprosy. So it wasn't just the bright lights, but he was trying to make a statement there as well. Is that what happened?
Well, yeah. So Makia, so we just leave this side story of some of the patients wanting to go to Las Vegas, and just Makia Malo, I have such wonderful memories of him. He's still alive, and I can remember walking the streets of Kalaupapa, singing together. We were sailing along down Moonlight Bay. Had a beautiful voice. I'd love to hear him also sing with his doctor, Kalani Brady. But he has had some wonderful talents of storytelling. And so he's given a number of wonderful performances in Honolulu. He's getting up in years now and has a little bit of dementia. But Makia Malo, we must keep in mind that when the patients first came there, they didn't want to be there for the most part. But years later, because of the wonderful brotherhood and sister form that was formed, Makia, I remember him telling me one day, he said, "Look at Fred, they called it hell," meaning Kalaupapa, the people that were in Honolulu, but he said, "We called it heaven." So what I want to emphasize is that I believe that because of the disease eradicated the barriers between race and religion, these people forged this beautiful community in which they were helping each other. And so they took this hellish experience and turned it around into creating a piece of heaven because of the love that they shared for one another, and because they were trying to assist each other, as were people that were coming in to work and being employed there to help them to rise above. And many of them did. They were able to triumph over this adversity.
Well, that we probably should mention at least one of them, and there was Julie Sigler, who was a nurse who went there to help. And she talked about becoming not just a medical helper, but a neighbor and a friend who would take them, give them rides places and say, "Let's go on a picnic." And she talks a little bit about the funerals that they held there. Can you talk a little bit about her and what she taught you?
Yeah, through each of these interviews, the book Reflections of Kalaupapa has scores of interviews. And I think what I learned was, and I found this with nurse after nurse, that went far beyond their job, that was spending time one-on-one with these precious people. They didn't want to just change bandages, but they wanted to do whatever they could. And so, as Julie mentions in her interview, she found herself just doing whatever they needed, but then also, becoming their friend. And so that's a wonderful thing of getting beyond duty and getting to the point where we see the person, we can see beyond the disease and the stigma, and we can see into the hearts of these wonderful people.
Well, it's wonderful to talk about each one of them, but maybe you could paint a broader picture for our audience and describe just kind of how they worshiped and worked and played. They carried on with real life. Could you give us some sense of what that looked like?
Yeah, I love reading that in various accounts or in interviews that they deliberately staggered the time of their worship service so that they could have social events together. And even today in Kalaupapa, even though there aren't many patients there, we still see that whether they're working for the government there or in the medical field or the patient themselves, that there isn't much, there's not really any wall between the Catholic place of worship or the Protestant or the Latter-day Saint. And so they can, go in and out. I remember Kool Bell, that was a Latter-day Saint I spoke of earlier that passed away in 2009. She talked about being recruited to sing in the Catholic choir. And I also, something that's very memorable to me is interviewing a number of the patients and finding out that they were helping each other build their places of worship. For example, the Edwin Lillipali mentioned in one interview to me that when they were restoring his Protestant church, that he was just so joyful that they were willing to come in and assist. And I looked into also the building of the Latter-day Saint Chapel and found out that there were actually more hours donated by Catholics and Protestants in building the Mormon church or the Latter-day Saint Chapel than the Latter-day Saints themselves. And some of the patients, because they wanted to be a part of it and lost feeling in their fingers, they actually had their wrists wired to a wheelbarrow so that they could assist their Mormon friends. And so, to me, again, I mentioned earlier that the story of Kalaupapa is the story of community. It's the story of finding the common ground. It's the story of building one another and encouraging a person to be, if they're Catholic, to be the best Catholic they can be, or a Protestant, the best Protestant they can be. It's an issue of just joining hands. And just as a footnote, I often tell my students at Brigham Young University, I say, guys, it's great to stand in a circle and join hands, but it's even better to join hands and look outside our faith tradition and ask ourselves the question, how big is our God? And to realize that everybody on the planet are all God's children, and to look for ways that we can be inclusive, that we can be a part of the community, not removed. And that's what I love about that I discovered in my research in both books, is that, with just my own faith tradition, I found that the Latter-day Saints were a part of the community. They weren't just off doing their own thing, but they were together and they were strengthening each other. And I found this was true of the Catholics and the Protestants, that even though they may worship on Sunday for an hour or so, they also are visiting each other's at times, especially on holidays. In fact, one of my very favorite stories is when we had a person by the name of Richard Marks, who was the sheriff of Kalaupapa. And he said to me one day, he said, "Look at Fred, I have been sheriff of Kalaupapa for 17 years, and I can boast of having no arrests." Now, that's a great line.
That's
He also said
remarkable.
on another occasion, he said, "Look, when we come to midnight mass, the Catholics," he said, "we had to sit on the front row because the Mormons and the Protestants were sitting on the back row for the Christmas mass." So, especially during times of the celebrations and holidays, you had this wonderful ecumenical spirit of coming together and worshiping and laughing and playing and just being together.
Well, I guess it's 2008 where the Hawaiian officials issued a formal apology to the people of Kalaupapa. And this idea of apology and forgiveness permeates the stories that you collected as well. And this Auntie Catherine that you mentioned earlier says in her story, "Let it go, forget about it, turn a new leaf, start all over. That's what God wants us to do. Don't hold grudges." If ever there were a message for our time, I think it's what this sweet little woman said. But do you feel like her attitude permeated just Kalaupapa, or do you think she was kind of an anomaly?
I think that her message is something that I found in a number of interviews, and going and reiterating what I said earlier, I see Kalaupapa as a model of what we need to do to come together. I've lived in the Middle East for nearly 2 years. I know something about just as one example, the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. And I think to myself, if I was given the platform to say something about that problem, I think I would want to talk a little bit about forgiveness and generating light instead of heat, maybe using Father Abraham that ties into both of those traditions and how he was able in a diplomatic way to divide land and to work things through. But yes, this is a wonderful message of forgiveness that permeates Kalaupapa, and I've been trying to share that message for the last decade to students at scores of universities internationally, as well as in North America. But it really has had a profound impact on me. When I think of Kalaupapa, I think of a Latin maxim that I came across one day that really is the sum of what I was trying to say in both of my books, which is simply, in the essentials, let there be unity, and in the non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity. That's what we need. We need that. We need to live and let live. We need to have love for other people, and we need to move forward and understanding that we're all part of this world and just learning to get along, the things we learned in kindergarten.
Well, it's a remarkable story. We thank you for capturing all these interviews and true stories of these people who lived in a very different place than most of us, but who have lessons for us that could help us. Thank you for your time today, Dr. Woods.
Thank you so much, Jan. It's been a pleasure to be able to visit with you today.
I'm your host, Janet Perry, and you've been listening to Dr. Fred E. Woods, author of Reflections of Kalaupapa. You can find links to his book, as well as his other book about Kalaupapa, in our show notes. We'll also place a link to his documentary. Please go to our website and make sure you sign up for our email list so we can always keep you informed of when we publish our latest blog post or podcast. And we want to hear from you too, so please take a minute to leave a review of the podcast. We'd also like to hear which nonfiction books you found insightful, inspiring, and uplifting. So let us know through any of our social media channels. We hope that we're saving you time as you look for your next good read. We know that book groups are starting to turn to us for recommendations. I'm your host, Janet Perry, and this has been another episode of Nonfiction for Life. Remember, at Nonfiction for Life, we believe there's something for everyone. We'll talk to you next time.